Okay, everyone, welcome this afternoon to Council meeting number 20 for August 15, 2023. I will call the meeting to order, and we do have regrets from Councillor Runge. And at this time, I'd like to recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. I will call for an approval of the agenda, but before we do that, there is an amendment, and that is to section K, or to item K4, Admin Report 89/23, Accessible British Columbia Act, City Manager Johnston to report, and as I say, that is a late agenda. And also under P2, depending on the outcome of K4, we may be looking at adding Accessibility Committee to our list of select committees. How did I do on that, Madam Clerk? Was perfect. I love it when you give me the thumbs up. So given those amendments, I will call for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Councillor McKelvey, that was a yes. It wasn't a wink. And thank you, Councillor Vick. All in favor? Carried. Now I will ask for a motion to adopt the regular council minutes of August 1, 2023. Councillor Goulet and Councillor Rudenberg. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have no presentations, no delegations, no items arising from previous special closed meetings, no unfinished business, no committee reports, no council report. Okay, good night, everyone. We're done. No, as it happens, we do have some staff reports, and I will now go to Director Turner for Admin Report 86B23 Housing Accelerator Grant.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report is to gain Council's approval to apply for the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's Housing Accelerator Fund, including review of a required action plan that is required for that fund. I'm just going to quickly go into background here and give you a little bit of a description of this program before we get into what we're doing under this program. HAF, as it's known, is a $4 billion fund administered by CMHC. All local governments in Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments, are able to apply. There are two streams based on community size. At the time of the 2021 census, Quesnel qualifies for the small rural North and Indigenous stream. At a minimum, the city must commit to 5 initiatives in a detailed action plan, which we'll go over our proposed plan in one moment. Points are awarded based on the speed at which the initiative may be implemented, the speed at which the initiatives will result in new development, the degree of improvement to the community outcomes, and the extent of increased stability and predictability in the housing system. Points are provided for No points are provided for existing initiatives, and I stress that for a reason. I'll come back to that. All initiatives must have a start date after the announcement of the funding on April 7th, 2022. Continuation of existing initiatives are not eligible as well. However, expansion of existing initiatives are eligible. The funding model provides base funding of 20,000 net new unit over 3 years, top-up funding of 12,000 net new multifamily units considered missing middle, top-up funding of 7,000 net new units and other multiple family housing, and affordable housing bonus of 19,000 net new affordable unit housing. Over the last 5 years, housing developments in the city of Quesnel have averaged 15.6 new units per year. In order to be eligible for the funding, the city must aim for at least 158 new units over 3 years, encouraged by these initiatives in the action plan. Communities with high growth are prioritized by the funding, and it's been made clear by the CMHC staff. We recognize we are probably of a lower ability to access this funding as our growth is lower than other communities, and We have had a number of conversations with the staff at CMHC to try and make this application the best it can be for where we are. One of the other initiatives, and why I highlighted before, highlighted the point earlier in this conversation, was that, again, we can't have any points for existing initiatives. This council has been very progressive in trying to do initiatives for encouraging housing development, and unfortunately, we can't utilize any of that good work. So we have done the best we can do in order to accentuate those initiatives and make a case that the new housing coming forth will be based on the accentuation of those initiatives, and that's what you'll see in this application. Amy and I have worked extensively with CMHC staff in order to try and do the best we can to position what we're saying to meet what they're looking for. And we feel like this is worth taking a shot at due to the funds that are available. So I'm not going to go into anything further about, sort of, what we expect here, but I just wanted to give council some understanding of our conversations to date with CMHC. Going into the summary of where we are with this. The HAF aims to increase housing supply by encouraging local governments to develop new initiatives that remove barriers to development. To be eligible, the city must develop the action plan, which is what we're going to go over and get council's approval on, commit to supplying a growth target that will increases the average annual growth rate at least by 10%. The growth rate must exceed 1.1%. Complete or update a housing needs assessment report if one has not completed within 2 years. We are required to update our housing needs report anyway by legislation next year, so that's going to be done anyway. So we will work all this in there, and that will be completed and meet that check mark on that requirement. Our action plan. For this action plan, we could be eligible for up to $3,724,000. That's why we're applying. We're going to take a shot at it. The funding amount is calculated based on the city's own predictions of projected development without HAF and additional projected development with HAF. So comparing what we would have done without it and what we would with it. The funding may be used to implement action items directly in the action plan or implement additional initiatives in the capital projects that would encourage housing development. As you'll see through this action plan, we do have some funds from this going into the actions initiatives to fund some of those initiatives, but there would be additional dollars for other capital works if we are successful here that we would look at and we would prioritize following understanding that we receive these dollars. So the action plan, there's 5 initiatives. There are 6 initiatives listed in this report. The 6th one we are striking off. The reason why we're striking it off is through those conversations with CMHA staff, it was pretty clear to us that they were not going to be approving of that initiative, and it might even decrease our application. The reasoning why is they don't want any initiatives that's just a flow through of dollars to developers. So they don't want anything that just directly funds the development or subsidizes the development. They want the initiatives ought to be initiatives that are projected to be long-term growth, that are improvements in the processes that can be sustained past the initiative itself, so that the city can maintain those initiatives going forward. That's why that one's stricken off, and I'll take that out of the resolution when we get to it. So the action plan. Let's talk about the initiatives. The first one is incentivizing accessory dwelling units. So as you're aware, we have the plans developed. They were developed in August of 2022. We are recommending waiving building permit fees for these continued on, as well as any ADU, including conversion of an existing building for ADUs. So basically, just trying to incentivize development of any accessory dwelling units, ADUs, going through in the future. In addition, we're also looking at doing additional initiatives to legalize secondary suites. That will include a potential rebate of up to $10,000 for up to 50% of the costs associated with legalizing the suite. All costs will be covered by funding received through HAF for the duration of the program. This one is one of the ones that I just talked about, not a flow through right through to the development. This is one that we talked in great deal with the staff member, and they identified that this was one that they felt as a whole initiative, it would be something that could be supported. Workforce housing development package. One of the key barriers to attracting workforce for existing potential future employers is housing, as we all know. We discussed in great detail. The staff at CMHC was very encouraged by this potential project and really encouraged us to move forward on a workforce housing attraction package that we could develop some initiatives that would encourage that further. You'll see in this, we're not going into great detail about what that's going to be. We're going to research and investigate what initiatives, but this could include extending the tax revitalization exemption program for this particular type of housing in specified areas. And will definitely consist of partnering with our key major employers in the community to do some development attraction and leading to some getting them connected with some of the housing providers and developers that are looking to build and making those connections up close and hopefully progressing development faster with those known numbers. The third is the zoning bylaw update. This zoning bylaw update is intended to increase supportive housing by allowing more supportive housing in more areas. So this will be a discussion about where we allow zoning for supportive housing in the community. We know that we're doing the vulnerable population review right now and housing review right now. We anticipate that work will be coming out of that review anyway. We know that working through with BC Housing, and we had a commitment with BC Housing that we would identify areas where we would want to have supportive housing, and this is just filling in that commitment. E-permitting is one that is definitely being pushed, or not pushed, is definitely being encouraged by senior levels of government in order to accelerate the transparency as well as the speed at which building permits are processed. This is one that we've looked into. The building inspector and I have reviewed different e-permitting systems, and they'll be amazing. It's amazing. We've looked at the costs. It's something that we might even be proposing anyway. If we don't go forward with this application, we'll be looking to that in the budget year anyway to propose that to council. Density bonusing. Density bonusing initiative will include allowing increased density on properties that are willing to, or that they're proposing mass timber, or they're proposing to exceed the existing step code initiative. So going to higher levels of step code than is currently required. So allowing different density provisions. So that basically with any of those initiatives, if they were allowed 30 units, maybe we give them an extra 10%. We'll talk about exact numbers as we develop that initiative. All of these initiatives have to come back to council for approvals in their various forms. So this isn't approving of these initiatives exactly in their entirety here. It is approving staff to go through with doing the full work on these initiatives. And again, we are striking Initiative 6. We did know it was an add-in initiative. We were very excited about that initiative, actually. But it's clear to us that it might actually decrease our points, so we're taking it out. So I'm going to stop and ask for any questions or comments on the initiatives from council.
Okay, Council, any questions or comments before we move to the recommendation? Councillor Rudenberg.
Thank you. And thank you for working on this. I know when this first came forward, it was kind of like, well, yeah, but we're doing all this stuff already. So to be able to find 5 more pieces of action plan that can be done is incredible. So thank you to you and your staff for doing that. We were on a short tour last week of Stepping Stones, a couple of us, and in discussion with their staff, they said they have 400 people on a waiting list for the various housing units that they have in Quesnel, and that doesn't include Silver Manor, which they also manage, that has a 200-person waiting list. So when you think about housing in this community, you know, we're talking about attainable, purpose-built rentals, a lot of it, because that's what's going to get more people into housing. The other piece too is around that whole, what I liked hearing was around the workforce housing development packages, because of CECO's Barkerville Gold update, potential of 400 people with the families coming to Quesnel for at least 12 years, because that's the length of the mine there. So I'm all for moving forward with this. I know a lot of communities struggle trying to figure out how to access this funding because they have so much in play already in their communities. But I'd like to think that even though we're not a high percentage, building, a community that's not increasing in numbers, we still need housing. So I look forward to seeing where this lands. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rudenberg. And Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the report, and ditto to Councillor Rudenberg on all the hard work that's been done. And it is unfortunate that we can't just tick off the boxes with all the work that's been done previously, but being able to expand on it is fantastic. So I think we're going to look good, especially with the work that we've done. They know that we're working hard. It was interesting with the 5 accessory dwelling unit plans being put out, and talking to the minister and them wanting to take those and actually take a look at them for other communities. I thought that was great, so good work on that. Just on the density bonusing, one of the things that the Minister of Housing was mentioning was that they may be looking in the future to incentivizing residential lots to have more density there. So it sounded like you were talking more about like apartment buildings and step code and things like that, but could this be used in a residential sense as well?
That's right. That it is for that residential. I mean, we know kind of that other one's coming. So, I mean, definitely we could say we're doing that as well, and just in case they don't do it. But that's moving from where currently they're talking about allowing every single family or normal residential property to allow at least at a minimum 3 residential units on each property. Of course, we're almost there already with our ADUs, and definitely I think it's something that Amy and I have talked about that we add into the application would be allowing the ADU, secondary suite, and house. Seems to be a great fit right now.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
And Councillor Bick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And like my colleagues have said, thank you for pushing on this and trying to make it fit for our community. The question I have is regarding the e-permitting. It sounds exciting. In terms of transparency, improving transparency and knowledge for applicant, is there any, do you foresee any, and I'm excited that you may bring this forward regardless of the status of this application. Is there any enhancement, do you think, in terms of streamlining processes or expediting processes?
absolutely in communication with landowners, builders, developers. I mean, one of the things that often gets stagnated is that sometimes they're just not aware of where they're supposed to be or what they're supposed to be doing, and things get pushed behind. And this process really, or these systems really make things communicated with them. We've often heard that the community would like to see more. Where building permits are, they like to go and see, you know, what stage are. All of that is available under these systems, and it will be quite a benefit. You know, we did get a cost on it, and actually I was quite kind of surprised how low it was going to be for us. So you'll be seeing more of that.
And just a quick follow-up, Director Turner. So in terms of this application process, not to be presumptive of council, but how quickly can it be submitted, and then how quickly do we get an answer, and how quickly can we begin to execute potential ideas here?
Thank you. Well, my colleague, who and I like that you guys have all said, thank you for pushing this along. My colleague pushed me along on this because I was so frustrated with some of it. So Amy definitely pushed me, like, let's just try, let's just get it going, let's just get it going. So and that was helpful for me for sure. And as well. Sitting there ready to fill in. The information is sitting there really ready to fill in. Unfortunately, they didn't only make the application process very complicated, they made the system of which we have to put it into very complicated. So we've prepped that so we can get that done real quick within the next day or two. It has to be in actually in the next day or two, but we're ready to go. Amy, did you know the date of when they're going to announce?
They've just said by the fall. So we've made all of our things starting by October.
Cleverly vague.
Yeah, fall 2023. Yeah.
Okay, so you're done, Councillor Bick? You're good? Anyone else? I've got a couple of questions here, and the first one goes to the tax exemption for the multifamily taxes. That's not covered by this program, is it?
It's an initiative that we will put in place. So it technically won't be covered by the program, but we already have that system. We'll be expanding it to, or that program, but we'll be expanding it to additional programs. So
therefore, the revenue that we are not receiving as a result of this tax exemption program is funding that would basically be picked up by the taxpayer.
Correct, but I think if you see the numbers that we could possibly get, I think it's worth it, right? In terms of, so we'll be $3 million. We'd have to do the numbers on what kind of tax loss revenue that would be, but yeah. So I don't know. We're getting dollars. We're getting $2 million. I think that we're going to have available for to subsidize city projects anyway, versus the tax loss that would come from that program.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting if we could maybe get some information on that, because I had someone ask me that very question about is the general taxpayer subsidizing these multifamily tax exempt projects, and I think that's a fair question.
Thank you. Anyway, and that will all come back for sure. And like I said, every one of these projects is going to come back to you for specific approvals. It has to be a bylaw change, so you have to review that in detail. We have to go back and bring that back to you anyway, because the current program is ending in 2024 anyway. So we are going to be bringing that back to you, telling you exactly what has been exempted, what has been the cost, I guess, to the taxpayer from the existing exemptions we've had, as well as what we project in the future with this program.
Okay, the second of three questions goes to the zoning bylaw update, and the report talks about increasing supportive housing units in Quesnel by allowing supportive housing and zoning changes accordingly. Do we have a number of sites or a number of units that we would be seeking to have rezoning enacted in order to accommodate new supportive housing projects?
We will be looking at discussing different policy options with council in terms of how we do that. What I've mentioned to council in the past, and I think it's something we're going to have to talk about, is many communities, and definitely our senior level of government, are looking at us just permitting supportive housing, not differentiating a housing type from other housing areas, so that we don't get into the aspect of going into public hearings and such for different classes of individuals, to be quite honest.
Okay, thank you. And finally, the need for new and upsized utility and road infrastructure as a result of development, whether it's subsidized or whether it's free market, is generally up to the developer. Under this proposal, would costs to the municipality for upsizing sewer, upsizing water, building new sidewalks, widening streets, et cetera, would that be covered under the HAF program?
Could we utilize that? That would be a subsidization to developers, so we'd have to be very careful with that. It's assisting business kind of an issue, very much like the flow through of the dollars that they were having some issue with. Developers would still be responsible for the different infrastructure improvements that are required for any development. However, what is different here is with these dollars, we may look on a broader perspective. Remember, we're doing an infrastructure master plan right now, and make improvements to certain areas that will facilitate development in the way we want it to be developed, and in the areas where we want it to be developed.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Rudenberg.
And just an FYI, the DAPR program, the development approval process piece, is being looked at, and it's been on the provincial table for a couple of years. So there's probably going to be some announcements around that program, making it more of a level playing field across, because it's all over the place around the province.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? Are we ready to move to the recommendation?
Thank you. We sure can if council wishes. I will go right to the recommendation. Once I find it. So, that Quesnel City Council supports the submission of an application to the Housing Accelerator Fund with an action plan that would use awarded funds for incentivizing accessory dwelling units, creating a workforce housing development package, updating zoning bylaw to expand areas allowing supportive housing, and providing density bonusing for specified requirements, period. As I've said, we're removing the last initiative out of that recommendation, and that an update to the housing needs assessment be completed before March 2024 as per section 585.31(3)B of the Local Government Act.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Vic moving and Councillor Elliott seconding. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Council. Now we will go to City Manager from the Director of Community Services, subject adding the Cariboo Sikh Temple to the Quesnel Community Heritage Register.
Thank you. This report is to seek authorization from Council to add the Cariboo Sikh Temple to the Quesnel Heritage Register. The executive of the temple have requested that the city add it to the Community Heritage Register. A council motion is required to add a building to the register. The Museum and Heritage Manager has prepared a draft statement of significance, which has been shared with the executive of the temple. If council approves the addition of the temple to the Heritage Register, it would be added to the online register on the city's webpage, and the museum manager would submit the statement of significance to the BC Register of Historic Places. There are no financial implications to doing this, and the recommendation is that the Cariboo Sikh Temple at 431 Lewis Drive be added to the Quesnel Heritage Register for its significance as a spiritual and social gathering place, and to recognize the importance the Sikh community has had in the development of Quesnel.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott moving, Councillor Goulet seconding. Before we call for the vote, I think this is most appropriate that we're doing this now in view of the fact that this is the 50th anniversary of the Society. And in fact, Councillor Rudenberg and Councillor Goulet and myself were at the Sikh temple on Sunday, and I spoke, but I was very reluctant to sort of mention this because I didn't want to presuppose Council's disposition of this motion, but I certainly would encourage a positive vote on this one. No further discussion. All in favor? Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you. I thought I did. Just testing. So all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Council. That was a good one. Now we're going to go to Admin Report 87/2023. And this is from the Senior Community Development Coordinator, Local Government Climate Action Program Reporting.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council and the public with a copy of the Local Government Climate Action Report submitted by the city for 2022. This report is for information purposes only. In 2022, the provincial government launched a new Local Government Climate Action Program, which provides local governments predictable and stable funding to support the implementation of local climate action that reduces emissions and prepares communities for the impacts of a changing climate. In 2022, Quesnel received $107,000 to support these initiatives. Projects were reviewed during the budget process. In 2023, Quesnel will receive $107,000 to support climate action initiatives. Projects will be reviewed during the budget process. However, a policy on how to spend these funds will most likely speed up any projects in the future. Part of the requirement for this program is that the city shares publicly the attached report on the city's actions and the attestation form. The city's greenhouse gases were 1,167,000 tons of carbon equivalent in 2021, which was a decrease of 7.9% from 2020, due largely to a lighter snow year than usual. In 2022, the city's greenhouse gases were 1,438 tons of carbon equivalent, an increase of 23% due to the new public works building and a heavy snow year. And just to remind council, in the climate action plan, we have a corporate emissions reduction target of 3.5% annual reductions from 2020, 2021, and 2022. We'll need to renew the reductions targets. That's the end of my report.
Okay, thank you. Do we have, well, we don't, this is for information only, so I'm just going to open the floor up to questions, comments, etc. I have a couple, and that is on overland flooding on page 27 of 30, question number 18. We indicate that Tiger Dam installation readiness. Is there anything in the plan for any degree of permanent diking that could double as trail development? Is that a consideration at any level?
It's not a consideration in the climate action plan, and I don't think it was a consideration in the floodplain mapping or anything. We don't have any plans for that.
Okay, the reason I was asking was that I was thinking that if it could be if it could be a step in the climate action plan, that it might be eligible for funding under climate action plan funding. That was where I was going with that.
Yeah, interesting. I can look into something like that in the future.
Because sort of look at the trails development that we are doing, and there are several little spots where I think that, a permanent dike might make a great sort of trail connection, so something to think about. I do have one other one here, and that is that question 22 and question 24 seem to indicate that we really haven't spent any money or really any of our resources so far, but I would suggest that the time of our planning staff in even preparing a report such as this, and going back to the different tasks in answer of question 18, that indeed we do have some investment in this program, and I'm wondering if it would be a number that would be sort of worthy of mention.
Yeah, so this reporting, it was for projects that were budgeted for in 2022 that were complete in 2022 using just the LGCAP funding. And we had, during the 2022 budgeting year, we had allotted those funds for certain projects. So I reported on those projects that we allotted the funding for. However, the 2023 funding is also allotted for, but the 2024 funding will need a policy so that we can figure out how to utilize that funding for new projects instead of just supplementing projects that are already happening, so that we can move forward our climate action plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think you point out an interesting issue there, where it says there's zero spending of this funding on climate change initiatives. And you're correct, this funding hasn't been tapped yet, but there is a lot of work by city staff on climate change items as part of other projects, whether that's public works or whether that's within our capital works projects. And typically, when there's a climate element to it, we don't break out that cost and charge it to climate, but they are true costs where we're spending incremental funding to get some climate change benefits. And we were actually just talking about it at a meeting today about maybe we need to start doing a better job at trying to segregate what those costs are so that we really have a better basis for reporting, and also a better understanding of really what's the city doing around climate change.
Thank you for that, and that all leads to the potential for funding available or funding potential through the programs. Okay, so we don't need a motion on that, and we have nothing under the oh, pardon me, we've got to go to item K4, admin report, which is Accessible British Columbia Act, City Manager Johnson to report, and that is a late attachment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is an interesting issue. As you'll see in the report, and for any of you with any long-term memory, you will see that the city's really come full circle on the issue of an accessibility committee. The province has finally caught up to where we were about 8 years ago of requiring an accessibility committee. So the purpose of this report is to seek council input into the creation of an accessibility committee as required by the new legislation. And the report isn't long, Mr. Mayor. I'm only going to go over the first couple of pages, but recognizing the fact that this is a late item for council, I don't think it's fair just to presume everybody's read everything. So I'm going to go over it in a little bit more detail, even though I hate to be one to read reports verbatim. So by way of summary, under Part 3 of the Accessible BC Act, the province requires that we conform to the new regulation. We need to have an accessibility committee, we need to have an accessibility plan, and we need to have a tool to receive feedback on accessibility. So that accessibility committee, if possible, should have at least one half of its members be persons with disabilities or representing a disability serving organization. For a while, we had talked earlier this year about whether we could combine this committee, perhaps with the PABCOM or something else. But I think that rule by itself that it needs to be focused on folks with disabilities or representing them. It means we need to create a standalone committee. It wouldn't make sense to combine that with another committee. Included as an attachment to this report is our terms of reference for our previous Quesnel Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee, which essentially is almost a cut and paste into a new terms of reference, I believe. There may be some small changes. What happened to that old committee? You recall that it existed for a number of years. It did some good work, and then it was converted into a reference group by the city with the feeling that it was a bit broader in scope than just city. So as a reference group, it would represent the rest of the whole city a little better, possibly. But the committee then wound up fairly shortly thereafter being converted to a reference group. So what we're recommending is that we kind of go back to that older style of having a committee, and that seems to be what the province is recommending as well. In 2018, the Quesnel Age-Friendly Initiative Committee, through grant funding, developed an age-friendly assessment and action plan. And I think it's a really important plan what can serve as a basis for how we move forward with the accessibility. Most of that plan, and I think there's a link attached to this report, and it is on our website. Most of that plan was around accessibility, because seniors' accessibility is the same as accessibility for any other reason. So there's some really good information in there, and I think it's a great starting point as we develop a plan. Would be to take that document, see what's still relevant, and then see if there's areas where we can tweak it or whether we can expand it so it's more than just physical accessibility. The scope of this is intended to be a little bit broader than just strictly physical accessibility. So the next steps on this would be if council approves the formation of a new committee, will be to determine if there's interested community members and organizations. And attached to some of the backup information, and it's actually attached to the old terms of reference, is a suggested committee list, and this is based on what we had last time. So we'd probably start with that committee list. And that's on the last page of this report, and just see what organizations are interested in participating. So what I would suggest, though, is that the opportunity for service on this committee, in particular for individual community members who want to serve on the committee, we should invite applications from them, including a letter why they are interested. And we've done that with some committees before. And the point of that is that we can hopefully try to capture a broad range of people with different experiences. So when they sit on the committee, it'll have a broader viewpoint, that committee. So it's not just necessarily physical accessibility. And staff, of course, can work with various agencies that we know service this community to try to get them engaged with the committee as well. In order to fulfill the provincial requirement, I think council would be the best to form a select committee chaired by a member of council. Once a committee is formed, it could review the terms of reference and make recommendations to council regarding changes to those terms of reference. The committee could also consider how best to reach the wider community to get input into the accessibility initiatives, which would lead to updating that age-friendly action plan to form a more current accessibility plan. We do have existing tools. I don't think we would have to reinvent anything, including Let's Connect or the city websites or surveys. I just spoke to Councillor Runge this afternoon, and he is currently the lead for the Accessibility and Inclusion Initiative of Council, as appointed by the mayor. That current model is that the city would host a stakeholder meeting for community members engaged in that area. Potentially, that could make recommendations to council. That model no longer meets the provincial requirements. So I suggest we go from that model back to a select committee. And when I talked to Councillor Runge, he said he was comfortable staying on as lead, but he also suggested that if any other councillors were interested in taking lead over this committee, he would be happy handing that over to you. He's not vested with it that he has to stay on it. But again, happy to serve at the discretion of council. So the recommendation is that council approves the formation of a new accessibility committee as a select committee and appoints a member as the lead and the lead or chair of the accessibility and inclusion committee. At the same time, as part of that recommendation, that council's appointment policy be amended as required, so that we just clean that up. Recommendation number 2 is that council direct staff to proceed with contacting local organizations to invite them to provide a representative to participate on the accessibility committee, and direct staff to advertise through all available channels requests for community member participation through an application process. And number 3, that's council direct staff to add a feedback tool to the City of Quesnel website and develop a paper copy that can be distributed locally. So, statutory requirements. The province of BC requires municipalities to form an accessibility committee under the Accessible BC Act by September 1, 2023. The financial implications. The implications for the committee itself are probably pretty minor, maybe for some printing, postage, and whatnot. The bigger implications, of course, are once the committee gets to work and starts making recommendations around parking, streets, facilities access, or any of the other things where potentially it could add cost to the way we do business. Having said that, the city's in pretty good shape right now. We've followed a lot of recommendations over the years from the accessibility perspective. So I think we're in pretty good shape on those issues. I don't think there's a huge deficit of things that need to be done. So I just want to flavor that a little bit. And it should be noted that the province is saying that they will be stepping up with $3 million to the Disability Alliance of BC over 3 years to support organizations to meet the requirements. So that may offset some financial implications, although that's not a real big load of cash. Attachments, provincial information is attached to this report. The Quesnel Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee terms of reference, the old ones from 2014 are attached, proposed committee list, and the age-friendly assessment and action plan. And I'm not going to go through any of the following attached information unless council has questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. I think we're probably ready for a motion to accept or to move the recommendation, and that's moved by Councillor Rudenberg, seconded by Councillor McKelvey. And for the interim, could we leave Councillor Runge in there as the lead, and if there's a need or a desire to change that down the road, we will do so accordingly. And while I'm at it, I don't know if this has any bearing on the motion, but the proposed accessibility committee structure, or the list, I'd like to suggest that the Cariboo Regional District be added to that list just for their information, because I like to see us cooperating and collaborating with the regional district. And I know that this is a city project, but we interact a lot, particularly through sub-regional rec and through joint advisory on issues that would affect accessibility. So I'd just like to have some discussion on that before we move, or can we just move the recommendation without worrying about the composition of the accessibility committee at this time? City Manager?
Yes, we could move that recommendation, and then we can bring the list back to council of who those community members are, and council could specifically approve once we've determined what that list is.
Okay, so we do have a mover and a seconder, don't we? And so I'll call the question on the motion without worrying about the composition of the committee at this point. So all in favor, opposed, carried. And if you could make a note, Mr. City Manager, of my suggestion that we try to include the CRD in there if we can. So I think
Mayor?
that concludes that item.
Mayor? Sorry. May I get two more resolutions? They're all separate.
You require two more resolutions?
Well, I'd kind of like them just because the first one we're amending a
Oh, I'm
policy,
sorry.
so.
Was that, I thought it was all one. I'm sorry. Okay, I got to go back to the report here and find the recommendation. I'm sorry about that. I thought it was all in. Oh, yeah, number one. Okay, let's go to number 2. Council directs staff to proceed with contacting local organizations. You have it all in front of you to invite them to provide a representative, et cetera, et cetera. Could I have a mover on that? Councillor McKelvey, Councillor Goulet, any discussion? All in favor? Carried. And finally, that council directs staff to add feedback tool to the City of Quesnel website and develop a paper copy that can be distributed locally. Mover, Councillor Vic, Councillor Rudenberg, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. My apologies for missing that one. So we have no one has asked for information, or no one has asked for an item to come forward under the council information package. We have no correspondence. We have no bylaws. We have no new business. Under information and question period, we have no changes to the upcoming meeting schedule, although we do have now a change to add accessibility committee to the list of select committees and name Councillor Runge as the chair. So can we have a motion on that to add that to the committee list? Okay, I'm good with that. So we're basically done with that. We don't have any announcements for future events. I'd like to talk to you about some past events, but I'll leave that for another time. In fact, I'd like to talk to staff about maybe changing it up a little bit so that we can basically report out on past events rather than just exclusively future events. But that's a question for another day. Any questions from the gallery? No? Okay, then I will call for a motion to adjourn, and that looks like Councillor Vic is moving that one, and Councillor Goulet is seconding it. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone.